The morning light in Brooklyn was always beautiful in the most merciless way. It streamed through the dusty window panes, cutting a sharp line across the wooden floor, splitting my small kitchen like a clean incision. The smell of coffee, eggs, and burnt butter blended into something that felt warm but false. I used to think happiness was like that too, a golden layer covering something quietly dying underneath. My name is Emma Collins, 30 years old wife to a successful man, and this morning I am pouring coffee for the person who will soon call me an obstacle. He walked out of the bedroom, his navy shirt pressed so perfectly it had no creases, his black shoes shining like mirrors, reflecting arrogance. The scent of his cologne overpowered breakfast, seeping into the air like an invisible declaration that this place belonged to him. Ryan Collins, 34 years old, mid-level manager at Bennett & Company, a corporation he worshipped like religion. I watched him eat his eggs, every bite slow and mechanical, as if he were fulfilling a duty, not enjoying a meal. He frowned and asked why I didn't learn from those modern women on Instagram and make something more sophisticated. I didn't answer. I just sipped my tea in silence. Sometimes silence is the only way to keep the last fragment of dignity. In that apartment, the ticking clock and the faint clink of cutlery were the heartbeat of a dying marriage. Ryan had no idea that the woman sitting across from him could buy the very company he dreamed of being promoted in. He didn't know I was Emma Mendoza Collins, the sole heir to Collins Holdings, the empire his father had only ever read about in magazines. I had hidden that truth for 2 years, not out of fear but disgust. Disgust at the eyes that only saw money in my skin, the smiles that called me an opportunity. After my engagement to Ethan fell apart after hearing him whisper plans to split my assets over the phone, I left Manhattan, locked my fortune in a trust, cut my hair short, moved to Brooklyn, and started over as a nobody. I had sworn I would only return when the world was worthy of the truth. Ryan was the exception, or so I thought. He walked into the small bookstore where I worked part-time, smiling like a man looking at a dream, not a fortune. He said he wanted to buy a book about how to start over. That line made me laugh. Who could have guessed he would be the one to make me start over again this time with cold blood and reason? I loved him with the proud foolishness of a woman who believed love could blur power. I agreed to marry him, even knowing he craved status. I hid my identity and only asked one thing: that he quit Bennett & Company, the firm, where my father had once been a founding shareholder, the place where every hallway could still whisper my name. He refused. "You don't understand," he said. "This is my dream." His dream, I would later realize, was built on my back. 2 years later, that dream had blossomed. He had an office, a company car, and a membership to a nightclub he claimed was for networking. And I, still in the same old cotton robe, cooked breakfast and kept the household running with the secret money I transferred from my personal account. He didn't know that I was the one saving our bills each month with dividends from the corporation he proudly served. He thought he was supporting me. How funny. This morning, as he stood at the door tightening his tie, I realized I had memorized every movement, the small crease between his brows when he adjusted his collar, the quick glance at the mirror to confirm his worth. But what I would never understand was why I was still here in this apartment, with a man who no longer looked at me as a person. When the door closed, silence swallowed the room. I looked at the table, cold eggs, black coffee, half a piece of untouched toast. Just like our love, it began with effort and ended with indifference. I cleared the table. The plates clashed, the sound sharp like glass breaking. My hands didn't shake, but the chill spread up my arms. The window reflected my face, pale, empty, no trace left of the woman once praised on the cover of Forbes. I didn't recognize her anymore. But maybe the scariest part was that she was still here, waiting to be awakened. Every morning was the same me, the kitchen, and the empty chair. Ryan left earlier, came home later. He said meetings, clients, projects. I could smell strange perfume on his collars, the cheap sweetness of deceit. Once I found a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket, the words, "room service for two," sliding across my skin like a cold blade. I didn't ask. I just put it back where I found it. Sometimes silence is the purest weapon. I began to observe. Every small detail was a shard of glass forming the shape of a disgusting truth. He said, "It's work," yet changed phones, hid messages, and once called me Isabel. The wrong name. Too wrong to be an accident. I remembered it all, every slip, every glance, every touch. A woman only needs a moment to know when love has died. I had hundreds of those moments. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen rereading the lines in my father's journal. When power loses morality, silence becomes betrayal. I understood he wasn't just talking about business. He was talking about men like Ryan, the kind who build their lives in someone else's shadow. I closed the book, turned off the light, and stood in the dark. In the window's reflection, my eyes caught the glow of streetlights, two pieces of steel hidden behind a calm mask. I didn't want to cry anymore. I wanted to remember everything and turn it into evidence, into a verdict, into the fire that would burn down everything he thought he owned. I thought of Ethan, the man who betrayed me with a false proposal. He had taught me the lesson of naivety. Ryan was teaching me the lesson of justice. Outside the church, bells rang. I stood, washed my hands, slowly buttoned my robe. The cold water slid across my veins, clear, sharp, real, just like me now. Everything inside me had changed without blood, only with truth. I turned away from the kitchen and walked toward the window. The city beyond the glass gleamed under the morning sun. The tall buildings reflected the light like blades, and I knew one day that light would belong to me. Not as a wife standing in her husband's shadow, but as the only one who dared to stand in the fire of truth. In this world there are two kinds of women, those who learn to endure and those who learn to reclaim justice. I used to be the first kind, but now I'm becoming the second. The city's hum hissed against the glass like a long breath. I closed my eyes and listened to my heartbeat, deep, slow, and precise, like the ticking of a clock counting down to the moment everything would collapse. And when I opened my eyes, the woman in the mirror was no longer Emma, wife of Ryan Collins. She was something he never believed could exist, a queen waiting for her verdict. That evening, the air in the apartment felt suffocating. The ticking of the wall clock marked a steady rhythm like a countdown to an invisible explosion. Ryan came home later than usual. The door opened, light from the hallway spilled in, carrying with it a thick scent of perfume so strong it made me nauseous. He didn't greet me. He just threw his keys on the table. His shirt was wrinkled, the top button undone, a faint lipstick stain on the collar like a trace of dried blood. I was sitting on the couch, the book in my lap, still open, though my eyes had long stopped reading. He glanced at me, his gaze passing over as if looking through an object, not a person. I asked calmly, "Did you have a good time?" He raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What did you say tonight, wherever you were? Did you enjoy yourself?" He laughed, a hollow sound, dry and reeking of contempt. "Are you jealous? Do you really think you still have that right?" I looked straight into his eyes, and for a moment it felt like staring at a corpse that could still talk. Maybe in that instant he realized something inside me had gone out, and that very silence made him step back half a pace. I stood up, closed the book, and walked past him without another word. In the bedroom, the light cast shadows on the cream-colored wall, reflecting two figures, one collapsing in the illusion of power, and the other rising in the chill of intellect. That night, I opened my laptop. The blue light illuminated my face, cold and resolute. On the screen appeared the logo of Collins Holdings, the corporation where I still owned 61% of shares under a hidden trust named EC01. My fingers moved across the keyboard, opening internal files, accessing the employee list of Bennett & Company, the firm where Ryan worked. His name appeared there, line 38, under the title Marketing Manager. I clicked on his profile, viewing his reports, projects, and event schedule. The upcoming annual gala flashed on the screen, the Bennett Annual Celebration at the Plaza Hotel, Manhattan. I read that line several times, and a strange feeling rose inside me, something sharp, painful, but also peaceful. That place used to be my home. My father had hosted the launch party of Collins Holdings in that very ballroom. Now his pathetic son-in-law was preparing to walk into it as an honored guest. Perhaps the cycle of humiliation is always perfectly cruel. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the wardrobe. The door opened with a soft creak. Behind the row of worn cotton robes was a hidden panel. I slid it aside, revealing a secret room one Ryan had never known existed. Inside, the dim light glimmered over rows of haute couture dresses, shoes, handbags, jewelry, the fragments of my past wrapped in silk and diamonds. My hand touched a black Dior gown, old but still breathing luxury. My fingers stopped at a sapphire necklace my mother left me. The blue gem reflected my eyes, cold and deep, as if I were staring into the abyss of myself. I remembered what my father once said: "You don't always have to fight with blood. Some battles are won simply by standing, and the weak will kneel on their own." I smiled faintly. Yes, I wouldn't scream, hit, or cry. I would let Ryan kneel. 3 days later, Ryan came home with a gold-embossed envelope. He tossed it on the table, his face glowing like a thief admiring his stolen prize. "Good news, Em. The company is hosting its annual gala this weekend. I've been invited, and this time I want you to come with me." His voice was light, but every word carried a murky undertone of calculation, vanity, and deceit. I picked up the envelope. Inside was a card engraved with gold lettering, "The Bennett & Company Annual Celebration Gala Grand Ballroom, the Plaza Hotel." "Strange," I murmured. "You used to say events like this were boring." He laughed, shrugging. "This year is different. I just got promoted. They probably want me to meet senior management, and if you behave properly, I'd like you to come with me." "Behave properly?" I asked, my voice so soft it was almost soundless. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me, his eyes sliding over me like he was appraising a worn-out item. "I mean, dress simple. Nothing flashy, no jewelry. And don't talk too much. Just stand there, smile, and let me do the talking. You understand, right?" In my head, I heard the slow tightening of a violin string stretched to the edge, ready to snap. He kept talking, completely unaware that my gaze had already changed. "And don't act too much like we're married. I have to keep things professional. People there don't really know your situation, and I don't want them to get the wrong impression. You understand, right?" I looked at him for a long moment. "I understand," I said. "Perfectly." That night, when he was asleep, I sat by the window. The lights of Manhattan flickered like towers on fire. I picked up my phone and sent one message: "It's time." The recipient, Garrett, the chief executive officer of Collins Holdings, the man who had sworn loyalty to my father until his last breath. The message read after 3 seconds. Outside, snow began to fall, white, pure, emotionless. I looked down at my hand resting on my thigh, the same hand that once trembled, signing a marriage certificate now steady as stone. In that silence, I could hear my heartbeat slow, even cold, like a gavel striking wood. The next morning, Ryan left for work early without a kiss. I watched him go with calm eyes. When the door closed, I opened the secret wardrobe again. This time I chose a long black gown with a square neckline, simple but perfectly cut to fit my shape. No lace, no glitter, just the flawless precision of design. I laid it on the bed beside my mother's jewelry box. My fingers brushed the sapphire surface, but then closed the lid. I wouldn't need it. I didn't need anything to shine. I was the light. Outside, Brooklyn was as gray as always, but something inside me had ignited. I brewed coffee and drank it slowly, staring out the window. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't thinking about sadness or betrayal. I was thinking about truth and how to expose it. Breakfast was still eggs and toast like every day, but this time I didn't set his plate. I left the spot in front of his chair empty like a ritual. Everything would begin from that emptiness. My hand touched the gala invitation on the table. The gold trim caught the morning light bright and cold. I knew that in that glittering ballroom he would shine until he realized he was only a shadow in the play I had written. The truth is, this he thinks he's climbing to the top of the tower, but he doesn't know that the tower was built with bricks that bear my name. And I'm about to bring it down with a single sentence. I stood up, placed the invitation in the drawer, and closed it. No need to lock it. The sound of the wooden door clicking shut echoed like a full stop, and in the final stillness that followed, I smiled. It wasn't a smile of love or sorrow, only the serene calm of someone who has chosen her role in the tragedy about to unfold. Across the city, sunlight struck the glass towers, a light that tomorrow I would turn into a blade, and I would use it to cut through every last illusion. The morning of the gala, the city was drenched in a light as cold as metal. The buildings of Manhattan reflected the sun like blades, each shard of brightness slicing through the air, sharp and silent. I woke early, not out of excitement, but because my body had grown accustomed to vigilance, as if a war waited just beyond the door. Ryan was still asleep. His breathing was steady, unguarded like a man too sure of his safety. I looked at him for a moment. The early light brushed across his face, highlighting the faint crease at the corner of his mouth, a mark of ambition, not time. Perhaps he had never looked more beautiful than now, silent, bare, and moments away from being unmasked. I stepped out of the room, the wooden floor creaking softly beneath my feet. In the kitchen, I brewed coffee. Its dark, bitter scent spread through the air, heavy and rich, like the plan I had been crafting for 3 days. On the table lay the gala invitation neatly beside an empty cup. I placed another envelope next to it, a black one without a name containing a copy of Bennett & Company's registration papers listing the true owner, Collins Holdings. A small detail, but one powerful enough to shatter his entire illusion. When Ryan woke up, I was reading the newspaper, my eyes gliding over the financial headlines where Collins' stock had risen slightly. He came out adjusting his tie, glancing at me the way one glances at furniture. Don't forget to dress simply. He reminded me, his tone light, like a man giving an order while pretending it was kindness. I nodded, slightly silent. He didn't know that silence can be the loudest sound of war. When the door closed behind him, I stood up and walked to the secret wardrobe. The black gown I had chosen the night before waited there ready like a weapon. I put it on slowly, each movement deliberate, almost sacred. Every stitch, every layer of fabric felt like part of a ritual of rebirth. I wore no jewelry, no lipstick, only bare skin, smooth and cold like a mirror before a storm. That afternoon, Garrett's car pulled up in front of my building. The silver-haired man stepped out, opened the door, and bowed his head slightly. "Miss Collins," he said, emphasizing the name. Everything is prepared. Internal shareholder announcement. Press release. Legal team. When you give the signal, I will activate it all." I nodded my gaze, catching my reflection in the car window, familiar yet distant. "Thank you, Garrett. Tonight no one calls me Miss, just Emma." "Understood," he said softly with a trace of respect in his eyes. On the way to the plaza, the city slid past the car window like a slow-moving film. Each street, each passing face, each glowing sign blurred into motion, but my thoughts were crystal clear. No one stays invisible forever. The silence of a woman is not surrender. It is the breath before the verdict. The plaza blazed like a golden torch in the heart of Manhattan. Luxury cars lined the entrance, camera flashes bursting like bullets of light. Ryan stood there in a black tuxedo, his arm around Tiffany Reed, the mistress he conveniently introduced to everyone as a close colleague. I stepped out of the car a few minutes later, unhurried. Every step I took on the marble floor echoed like the strike of a gavel. When Ryan saw me, irritation flickered across his face. "Why are you so late? I didn't want to arrive too early," I said. "Didn't want people to see me standing behind you." He frowned but said nothing. Perhaps he thought I was just being jealous. He didn't know this would be the last time he heard my voice without trembling. Inside the ballroom, golden light fell on hundreds of evening gowns, champagne glasses, and practiced smiles. The jazz music drifted like silk, covering the teeth of predators. Ryan led Tiffany into the crowd, his hand resting on her waist as if I were invisible. I didn't look at them. I walked to the bar and took a glass of orange juice. The clear golden liquid reflected the image of me, a woman in black, head high, standing at the edge of a celebration that used to be mine. Garrett was there near the stage. He gave me a subtle nod. Everything was ready. I only needed one signal. Then fate arrived in the cruelest moment. An older executive asked Ryan, "And who is that lady?" Ryan turned. The stage lights caught his face, illuminating the smug smile I had once loved. "Oh," he said lightly, "you're just the housemaid." Very devoted. The air fell still, the music seemed to stop. A few eyes turned toward me, curious, pitying, even mocking. Tiffany smiled the smile of someone who thought she had won. I didn't say a word. I just looked at Ryan. That look alone made him falter for half a second because there was no anger in it, only emptiness. I set the glass down. The orange liquid spilled across the table, spreading like a trail of golden blood under the light. I walked away quietly. Each step struck the marble floor like the heartbeat of a waking beast. Behind me, Garrett saw me move and nodded. I didn't leave the hall. I walked straight down the corridor toward the stage prep area. A few staff members looked up, ready to stop me, but Garrett's voice cut through. "Let her pass. She's the owner of tonight." I climbed the steps, each one slicing me further from the past. The stage lights glared white, almost blinding. At the curtain's edge, the host was about to announce the Employee of the Year award. I gave the signal. Garrett stepped forward and whispered into the host's ear. The man's face drained of color. He nodded. The lights in the ballroom dimmed instantly. Only one spotlight remained fixed on me. I stepped out into absolute silence. Every face that had ever dismissed me was now turned upward. Ryan stood frozen. Tiffany clutched his arm, her hand trembling. I took the microphone. My voice rang out cold, steady, unwavering. "Good evening. Thank you all for attending the Bennett & Company annual gala, or perhaps I should say, Collins Holdings." Murmurs rippled through the room like a sudden wind. I looked directly at Ryan. "I am Emma Collins, the only daughter of Richard Collins, founder of this corporation. For the past 2 years, I have lived among you quietly watching, listening, and tonight I am ending this play." Ryan's face turned pale. He tried to smile, but no one returned it. Garrett stepped forward and handed me a folder. I opened it and placed it on the podium. According to shareholder rights and company policy, as of this moment, I hereby terminate the employment of Ryan Collins for unethical behavior and gross misconduct, including the public humiliation of another individual at a company event. The room erupted. Ryan staggered backward, stammering, "Emma, you're insane." "No," I interrupted. "I've never been more sane." I turned to Tiffany, my gaze sharp as a blade. "And you, Tiffany Reed from the PR department, who used personal relationships to manipulate your superiors, you are also dismissed, effective immediately." Security stepped forward. The two of them were escorted out through the murmuring crowd. I watched them go, Ryan's eyes full of desperation, Tiffany in tears, but inside me there was no anger, no triumph, only the calm of justice served. Applause began from Garrett and then spread through the room. I bowed my head slightly. The lights brightened again. The gala continued, but it was no longer Ryan's celebration. In the crowd, I caught the eyes of several women colleagues, employees, wives of powerful men. They didn't look at me with fear, but with something else, recognition. I nodded softly. They understood. That night, as I left the plaza, I didn't look back. Manhattan still blazed behind me, but I carried my own light now, a light that no longer belonged to stages or prestige, but to justice. And as I stepped into the car, I whispered just for myself, "The game is over." Outside the plaza, Manhattan was draped in a luxurious night. Neon lights reflected on the wet pavement like a warped mirror splashed with gold and red, like blood mixed with wine. I stepped out of the hotel, my long black gown swaying softly in the wind. The sound of applause still echoed behind me, fading like the memory of a dream that had finally settled its debt. Garrett walked beside me in silence. Neither of us spoke. He opened the car door and bowed slightly. I sat down, the city's light sliding across the window, cutting my face in half, one side in light, the other in shadow. The car began to move. Outside, New York sped by like frames of a fast-forwarded film. I leaned my head against the glass, tracing a circle with my fingertip on the mist that had formed, then erased it. My life had been like that, once a closed circle of love, betrayal, and power. But tonight that circle was broken. I didn't feel triumphant. I only felt light, so light it was as if I were floating in the emptiness I had created. Garrett spoke, his voice low and respectful. "You did something your father would be proud of." I turned to him, my gaze calm. Proud or pitying? He said nothing. I continued, my voice steady and cold. "My father believed justice came from reason, but he never said that justice must be bought with the death of love." Garrett lowered his head. I knew he understood because he, too, had once lost everything to something called loyalty. The car turned onto Fifth Avenue. The window reflected the skyscrapers gleaming like upright blades. I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath. Behind my eyelids, I could still see the flickering lights like the city's bloodstream. This city never sleeps. It only devours people more slowly at night. "Home?" Miss Garrett asked. "I have no home here," I replied. "Take me to my real one." He understood immediately. Not the Brooklyn apartment, but the mansion on the Upper East Side, the home of my parents, the place I left 2 years ago thinking I could live like an ordinary person. A mistake. No one born in fire can ever be ordinary. The tall black iron gates opened slowly, releasing a long metallic sigh. Along the driveway, the garden lights came on, automatically illuminating the wet stone path. I stepped out of the car, the breeze carrying the scent of white roses, my mother's favorite, which lined the walkway. The mansion appeared in the dim glow, gray roof and ivory walls, standing silent like a witness. When the door opened, I stopped. No one was waiting, only dust and memory. Inside, the air still carried its old scent, oak wood paper, and the faint trace of my father's cigarettes. I walked slowly, my heels tapping a steady rhythm, the echo like the heartbeat of the house. Everything was as it had been, my mother's oil painting on the wall, the piano untouched since the day she died, and the family photograph on the mantel where I was smiling, 25 years old, naive to the point of foolishness. I stopped at my father's desk. His old leather-bound notebook still lay there. I opened it. On the first page, his handwriting read, "Power is not making others fear you. It is making yourself fearless." I read the line 3 times. Each word carved itself into my bones. Then I closed the notebook and sat in the chair he once occupied. The room fell into silence. My phone vibrated. The screen lit up Garrett new message. Breaking news. The media has published the video from tonight. The entire financial world is in chaos. Bennett and Company stock has collapsed. Ryan Collins' administrative accounts have been suspended. We are reclaiming full ownership. I stared at the message, the glow of the screen reflected in my eyes. I didn't smile. I simply typed 2 words, "Well done." Then I turned off the phone. My hand trembled slightly, not from emotion, but from the remnants of adrenaline after the storm. I stood and walked to the large window. The city sprawled beneath me, thousands of lights flickering. It was what my father once called the cycle of power, where the strong build, the walls, the weak become the foundation, and the intelligent turn both into tools. I didn't know which one I was. I only knew that from now on I would never be someone's foundation again. I switched on the main lights, and the mansion glowed, every LED bulb reflecting off the marble floor. The light filled the room cold and pure like a vow. Every stain from the past 2 years was washed away. I took off my shoes and walked barefoot across the floor, the coolness traveling up my spine. Each step felt like the rhythm of my own rebirth. On the coffee table sat the crystal trophy my father once received, Visionary Investor of the Year. I lifted it, looking through the clear glass. Inside, my reflection stared back, no longer a betrayed wife, but a CEO who had just reclaimed her throne. I walked down the long hallway toward the bedroom. The motion sensor lights flicked on section by section, as if the house itself recognized its owner's return. In the hallway mirror, my reflection split and merged with the light part of me, a live part of me buried with my dead love. I opened the bedroom door. The space was vast, high ceilings, gray silk-covered walls. Everything was clean except for a thin layer of dust on the bedside table. I placed my hand on it, drew a line. The dust lifted, shimmering in the light like ashes. I lay down, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. In my mind, there was no sound of Ryan, no image of Tiffany, no tears. Only a slow, steady heartbeat and the soft whisper of rain outside the window. The first rain after it all ended. When I closed my eyes, one image flashed across my mind. Ryan's face from tonight, pale, his mouth open, but no sound coming out. It was not an image that would haunt me. It was proof that justice has a shape, and tonight it wore my face. A bolt of lightning split the sky white and blinding. For a moment, the entire room reflected the light, as if captured in a photograph still perfect and full of power. I exhaled slowly. In my heart, there was no hatred left, only the absolute calm of someone who had walked the full length of pain. And as the thunder rolled, I whispered softly to myself, "A throne needs no blood, only memory." Another flash tore across the sky, and I smiled, eyes still closed, lips barely moving. "You'll remember me forever, Ryan, like a sentence that can never be erased." The next morning, I woke up in the pale, cold light. New York was veiled in mist, the buildings across the avenue covered in a layer of glassy smoke. I sat up, the white sheet slipping off my shoulder, revealing faint marks on my skin from the night before, not from touch, but from a sleep pulled tight like a seam. In the mirror, my reflection looked pale, but my eyes gleamed with something almost frightening. The dawn of a survivor is always like that, not beautiful, just real. I slipped on a robe and walked to the window. Below, people hurried through the streets as if no one had ever lost anything. Everything went on as usual. The only difference was that I no longer belonged among ordinary people. I had crossed the line between the victim and the judge, and the most dangerous thing about that line is that once you cross it, you never come back. The phone rang. The screen showed Garrett's name. I answered. His voice was calm, but carried a quiet urgency. Breaking news, Emma. King. Bennett and Company stock has dropped another 27%. The board has proposed an emergency merger with Collins Holdings to stabilize the market. The press is calling you the Iron Widow of Wall Street. I was silent for a moment, listening to the sound of his breath on the other end. They're calling me a widow? No, Emma. He hesitated, then spoke as if confirming a truth. They're calling you an icon. I hung up. The room returned to silence. The breeze stirred the curtains, making the light flicker on the walls like the city's breathing. I opened my laptop and watched the news headlines scroll endlessly. The mysterious wife of the former Bennett manager is the anonymous CEO Emma Collins, financial queen, or perfect avenger. My photo filled the screen, a calm smile. Cold eyes, the black curtain of the gala behind me. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to see what was already too clear. What I needed was the darkness that remained in it. I went downstairs. On the table, Garrett had left an envelope. Inside were documents from the legal department, a divorce petition. I flipped through the pages, signatures from lawyers from the court, and the last blank line waiting for mine. The pen was there, thin black. I signed. The ink spread across the paper like the final incision of a successful surgery. I didn't cry. Divorce papers aren't worth the moisture. As I set the pen down, the sound of soft rain came through the window as if the city was cleansing itself. I held the file in my hands and looked out. The drizzle fell against the glass, each drop slow and deliberate, like time tapping its rhythm. Below, New York buzzed with life, but to me, every sound had been separated from the world. By noon, Garrett returned with a new file. These are all the assets transferred back to your name, he said. Collins Holdings is officially consolidated. Full control is yours. And he paused. Ryan Collins has requested a meeting. He says he wants to apologize. I looked at him, my expression unreadable. I don't need an apology, but I will meet him. That afternoon in the conference room on the 45th floor of Collins Tower, Ryan walked in. The light behind him framed his hair in a dull gold, but his face was ashen. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose dark circles under his eyes. He looked at me like a man standing before the wound he caused, too afraid to touch it. Emma. He said, his voice rough. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, and what struck me first was that he was no longer frightening. He was just a man who had lost everything, clinging to what he once despised. "What do you want?" I asked. He took a breath, his hands trembling. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. I didn't know who you were." If I had known, I interrupted my tone, steady, detached. "If you had known who I was, you would have knelt sooner, wouldn't you?" He went silent, his head bowed. I stepped closer, stopping just one arm's length away. "Ryan," I said softly, "you didn't betray me because you didn't know who I was. You betrayed me because you thought I was no one." Each word fell slowly, precisely, like nails into wood. "And that," I finished, "is the greatest sin of all." He looked at me, eyes glossy, but not from remorse. only from realizing there was no way back. I placed the divorce papers on the table. "Sign them," I said. "Justice doesn't need tears." He took the pen and signed his hand, trembling. When he was done, I gathered the papers without another word. "Do you want to know what I learned after 2 years of being your wife?" I asked, my hand already on the door handle. He didn't respond. "I learned that kindness isn't a virtue. It's an invitation for the weak to destroy you." I left the room, leaving him alone. Behind me came the sound of muffled sobbing, thin and fragile, like the last breath of a dying animal. That night, I stayed in the office until late. The city outside was ablaze, each floor of light like the rungs of a ladder built by restless souls. I opened my father's notebook and wrote a single line, "Father, I have returned." And I did not choose hatred. I chose awakening. The wind slipped through the cracked window, the sound of it mixing with the soft rain like a wordless symphony. I closed my eyes and listened, hearing not threats anymore, only echoes. When I left the building, Wall Street shone like an ocean of electricity. My heels clicked evenly on the stone pavement. With every step, I felt as if I were shedding another layer of old skin. In the distance, the electronic billboard flashed a new headline, "Emma Collins, the woman who made the financial world bow." I stopped looking up. The glow from the screen spilled over my face, shimmering like golden ash. I laughed not out of joy, but because I realized I had gone too far to ever fear anything again. I turned and walked into the crowd. In this world, fame is only light. Love is only ash, but intellect is the fire that never dies. And I knew that tonight somewhere Ryan would open his eyes, stare at the empty ceiling, and understand I didn't avenge him with pain. I avenged him by becoming someone he could never reach again. I left Wall Street at dawn just as the city lights began to fade, making way for a truer light, the kind no one can control. On the misty avenue, droplets from the massive billboards fell onto the pavement, reflecting a wet, weary, yet defiant New York. I walked through the cold hands buried deep in the pockets of my trench coat, my heels tapping a steady rhythm like a clock, counting my life backward. With every step away from the financial district, I saw it clearly. What I had lost and what I had reclaimed no longer belonged to love. It belonged to justice. When I arrived home, I took off my coat and turned on the lights. The warm glow filled the ceiling, reflecting on old picture frames, one of them showing my father and me at the inauguration of Collins Tower. His eyes looked at me then young, but full of confidence. Now those same eyes reflected in the mirror met the gaze of a different woman, cold, mature, and detached from emotion. I poured a glass of wine. The red liquid flowed thick and heavy like blood. I swirled it gently, watched the light glint across its surface, then drank. Not to forget, but to remember. My phone vibrated. A message from Garrett. "The press council is requesting a live interview. They want you to speak about women's empowerment and recovery after betrayal." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. I didn't need to make a statement. My existence was already the answer. I opened the window. The sky had not yet brightened completely, but the horizon glowed faintly blue. Below the city breathed steadily car horns echoing like a mechanical heartbeat. Amid that chaos, I found a new kind of stillness within myself, not the peace of forgiveness from others, but the calm of having forgiven myself. When the first sunlight spilled across the floor, I sat at my desk. Garrett entered carrying an envelope. "From the court," he said. "The divorce is officially finalized. And there's a letter from Ryan sent through his attorney." He placed the white envelope in front of me, waiting silently. I looked at it but didn't open it. "Keep it," I said. "For record purposes. I don't read what's already dead." Garrett nodded his eyes, holding both respect and sorrow. Before he left, I called after him. "Garrett, do you know what's most terrifying about a betrayer?" He stopped. I continued slowly. "It's not when they deceive you, it's when you realize you once believed them." The room fell quiet again. I opened my computer. The screen displayed a draft of the new corporate strategy, expanding Collins Holdings into sustainable investments, the vision my father once dreamed of, but never lived to fulfill. I scanned through the charts, the numbers dancing coldly yet beautifully, like a piano note struck wrong that somehow made the melody complete. I began to type. No hesitation, no tremor. Every keystroke was a decision, every word a breath in a new era. By noon, I stood before the board of directors in the glass-walled conference room. Every gaze was fixed on me, the woman who had changed the company's destiny overnight. I stood tall in a crisp white blouse, no jewelry, only a voice that carried certainty. "I am not here to teach you a moral lesson," I said clearly. "I am here to prove that self-respect has financial value." No one spoke. They didn't need to. The business plan I laid on the table was weighty enough for the applause that followed to sound entirely sincere. After the meeting, I stepped into the hallway and stood alone by the glass wall looking down at the city. Below, streams of people flowed through the streets. Cars lined up smoke from the subway vents, coiling into the silver-gray sky. Everything kept moving, but I knew that somewhere Ryan was struggling among the ruins of his past. Maybe he regretted, maybe he resented, but it no longer mattered. I had taught him the final lesson: when a woman goes silent, the world hears her through thunder. That evening I came home earlier than usual. By the fireplace I poured another glass of wine, this time for my father. "It's done, Father," I whispered, "and I've learned not to avenge with anger, but with order." I raised the glass and took a sip. The wine slid down my throat, burning gently, like memory. Outside the window, the city lights rose toward the sky, mingling with the real stars. Later that night, I stepped out onto the balcony. The cold wind swept in, carrying the metallic scent of the Hudson River. I inhaled deeply, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt freedom, not the freedom of a victor, but the freedom of someone no longer afraid to lose. I sat down, gazing toward the distance, where the plaza still glowed like a golden scar. Perhaps someday I would return not for vengeance, but to prove that women don't need revenge to be strong. They only need memory and choice. My father's voice echoed in my mind, "Emma, you cannot stop the darkness, but you can make it kneel before the light." I smiled softly. Perhaps he was right. I couldn't destroy the darkness. I had simply learned to illuminate it with my own pain. On the table, the ink on the divorce papers had dried. I rested my hand on the edge of the document, not to hold on, but to give thanks. Because without that betrayal, I would never have known I still had the strength to live like this, clear calm, and beyond the need for anyone's validation. The wind grew stronger. The night stirred the distant lights flickering like the pulse of the city, or perhaps my own. In that moment, I understood justice doesn't arrive through shouting. It arrives in the quiet moment when you walk away head held high without looking back. I closed my eyes, leaned into the chair, and listened to the rhythm of my heart merging with the wind. A thin rain began to fall, each drop, cool against my skin, disappearing on contact. I whispered, unsure if it was to the sky or to myself, justice doesn't need to win. It just needs not to kneel. And when lightning split the night sky in the distance, I knew the old life had burned away. All that remained was light. Monday morning, the city awoke in the cold gray of the coming winter. The glass towers reflected the silver light of the young sun, thin and fragile, like a promise already withdrawn. I sat in the conference room on the 50th floor of Collins Holdings, facing 12 men in dark suits. They spoke of capital market share and post-crisis profits, while I listened in silence, the silence of someone holding a knife hidden in her sleeve. My voice cut through the air, soft but sharp enough to slice it clean. I don't need to hear more numbers. I want to hear responsibility. The long table fell silent. Their eyes flicked toward one another, then away. I pressed a fingertip against the glass table, one slow tap. In this company, the intelligent know how to correct their mistakes. The foolish wait for forgiveness. I do not forgive. The chief financial officer, a man who had once been close to Ryan, swallowed hard. His voice trembled as he said, "We were just following the old system." I met his eyes without blinking. The old system died with the man who ran it. If you want to survive in this new era, learn to stand upright. No one replied. Only the sound of pens signing filled the room, cold, precise. The meeting ended like a verdict delivered. Garrett walked me out, speaking as we went. "The press is calling you the velvet guillotine," he said. "The way you handle things, soft but absolute." I smiled faintly. I didn't cut off anyone's head. I merely returned the true weight to justice. He nodded, pride flickering in his eyes, but behind it, I saw something else, fear. That afternoon, I went to the law firm. On the table lay the final merger documents between Collins Holdings and Bennett and Company, waiting for my signature. A contract worth billions and the final erasure of a name that once belonged to Ryan. I signed quickly, decisively. The ink spread across the paper, thin and sharp as a blade's edge. The lawyer looked up in admiration. "Miss Collins, you've just become the most powerful woman in American finance." I closed the file, my voice calm. Power doesn't lie in position. It lies in the ability to stand when everything else has fallen. That night, I returned to the old apartment in Brooklyn, the shell of my former life. The door creaked softly as it opened. A fine layer of dust covered everything. Streetlight filtered through the curtains, drawing long stripes across the floor. I stepped inside, feeling like I was walking through an old body I'd once abandoned. On the kitchen counter sat a white porcelain cup, the same one I used to fill with coffee for Ryan every morning. I touched it. It was cold. In my head, I heard my own voice from 2 years ago saying, "Drink it, you'll like this flavor." How strange that memory can sometimes serve only as evidence of foolishness. I turned on the tap, washed the cup, and dropped it into the trash. A simple ritual. Yet in that moment, I felt lighter, as if shedding another soul. The apartment no longer smelled of the past. Only the sound of running water remained, reflecting light, like a long, thin path, straight and cold, like the one I was walking now. Later that night, I returned to the mansion. Garrett was waiting in the living room, standing beside a small suitcase. "Personal belongings from Ryan delivered by his attorney," he said. I stayed silent, not touching it. "Keep it," I told him. "Justice keeps no souvenirs." Garrett bowed slightly and carried the suitcase away. I walked to my mother's piano. For the first time in 2 years, I opened the lid. My fingers touched the keys. The sound was dry at first, then slowly grew warmer. An old melody rose clair de lune. I played softly, each note falling into the night. Moonlight poured through the glass, spreading across my hair, blending light and shadow, gentle yet sharp. At the final note, I stopped, exhaled. I wasn't sure if I was crying or just breathing. The doorbell rang. Garrett returned quietly. "Someone wishes to see you," he said. "She asked for 5 minutes only. Name Laura Reed." I raised an eyebrow. "Tiffany's sister." I nodded. "Let her in." Laura entered her coat, damp eyes red. "Miss Collins." She said I didn't come to beg. I came to say my sister lost her job, her reputation, and now herself. But I understand. You weren't wrong. I looked at her in the dim golden light. "Then why are you crying?" Laura smiled through her tears. "Because I used to think my sister was strong, but she only imitated strength. She never understood it." I nodded. "Strength isn't about taking. It's about enduring when there's nothing left." She lowered her head. "Thank you for not suing her further." I didn't answer. I simply said, "Tell your sister I don't hate her. But if she wants to live, she needs to look in the mirror every morning without shame." Laura nodded and left quietly. When the door closed, I sat down, my hands folded together. I didn't tremble. I only felt a clean emptiness, no old scent, no echo. That emptiness was freedom. Late that night, Garrett appeared one last time. "Shall I cancel tomorrow's interview with the journalist?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, I'll speak. Once." The next morning, I sat before the camera. No lavish gown, no symbol of power, just me, in a white shirt, hair tied back, voice low and steady. "I'm not telling my story to earn sympathy," I said. "I'm telling it so women understand that we don't need to be rescued. We only need to remember who made us forget who we are." The studio was silent. The light burned into my eyes, but this time I didn't blink. I looked straight into the lens, my tone slow, deliberate, like an oath. Betrayal doesn't kill a woman. It only peels away the old skin so she can be reborn in bone. And if anyone asks if I sought revenge, I'll say no. I simply restored fairness to the light. The interview ended, but those words spread across every newspaper the next morning. They called me Emma Collins, the woman who refused to break. I didn't feel pride. I only felt normal, because in the end, what I wanted wasn't for them to know I was strong. It was for me to no longer need to prove it. As I left the studio, I caught my reflection in the mirror, the light behind me forming a faint halo around my hair. Not because I was glowing, but because I had stopped running from the light. And for a brief moment, I heard my father's voice, soft as wind through glass. "When you are no longer afraid, Emma, the world will fear you." I smiled. The face in the mirror smiled back, sharp, calm, wordless. Outside, New York shone once more, and I knew that from now on, the light wasn't shining on me. It was coming from me. On a weekend night, the wind swept across the glass roof of the top floor of Collins Tower, creating long, low sounds like the breathing of the city itself. I stayed late, the room lit only by the soft gold glow of a desk lamp. Outside the window, Manhattan shimmered countless glowing windows like living cells inside a giant body that was alive, breathing, and waiting to be torn open. I stood still, looking down. Below the flow of cars traced white and red lines, each pulse matching my heartbeat, slow, steady, deliberate. When Garrett entered, he carried a new folder. His voice was calm. "Investors from Europe have approved the proposal to open a branch in Geneva. They want you to attend the signing ceremony." I nodded. "Prepare the private jet. And I want to use the title Chairwoman Collins, not CEO. I've done enough managing. Now I lead." Garrett smiled faintly, the smile of a man who knows exactly what he's witnessing, the making of a legend. After he left, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. On the screen was a new article from the Financial Herald, Emma Collins, from a humiliated wife, to the symbol of feminine order in global finance. Beneath the headline was a photo of me standing among a group of male executives, my head held high light, shining down from above, casting my face half in brightness and half in shadow. I stared at it until the screen's glow made my eyes sting. Then I closed it. No need to save it. I didn't want to be an icon. I only wanted to exist truly as an independent being, belonging to no one, defined by nothing but my own truth. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. I opened a drawer and took out a white envelope, the letter from Ryan I had never opened. I held it in my hand until my fingertips could feel the texture of the paper fibers. Something inside me whispered, "Open it, then burn it." I tore it open. Inside were only a few hurried lines written in blue ink. "I don't ask for forgiveness. I only want to say I understand now. You didn't need to kill me. You did something far crueler. You forced me to live." I read to the last line, my heart unmoved. No anger, no pity. Only a strange sensation, emptiness, but clean. I folded the letter, placed it on a silver tray, and lit a match. The paper curled, burning bright gold, the ashes swirling before dissolving into the air. I watched it like watching a soul depart, a piece of the past cremated without requiem. When the flame died, I rose and stepped out onto the balcony. The New York night was cold, but I wore no coat. The wind brushed over my shoulders, slipped beneath my collar, cold, as a reminder that I was still alive. Below, the Hudson River curved, reflecting the city lights like a band of liquid silver. I breathed deeply, the air tasting of metal and faint smoke. The phone rang. It was Garrett. "Emma Ryan Collins. He's left New York. Sold the last of his remaining shares. The press says he's disappeared." I gazed into the distance, my eyes unfocused. He hasn't disappeared, Garrett. He's simply gone back to where he belongs, nothingness. A brief silence followed. "Are you all right?" he asked. I smiled faintly. All right is a word for people who can still measure their pain. I ran out of that. I hung up, returned to my desk, and opened my notebook. I wrote one line, slow and certain. "Justice doesn't require someone to kneel. It only needs someone to stand." The next day, I visited my parents' graves. The cemetery in Long Island was quiet, the wind stirring through rows of birch trees. On the headstone, engraved with the names Richard and Eleanor Collins, I placed a bouquet of white roses. The ground was damp after rain, carrying the cold, earthy scent of salt and truth. I knelt and whispered, "I had to take a long way around to understand your words, Father. I don't need to avenge anyone. I just need to never betray myself." The wind lifted my hair gently, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice. "Good. You understand. Now live." I left the cemetery as the sky dimmed. On the drive back, the radio played Nessun Dorma. The tenor's voice rose rich, triumphant, filled with loneliness. I looked out the window. The final rays of sunset spilled over the river like molten metal. For a moment, everything was brilliant, then darkened. Beautiful, almost cruelly so. That evening, I hosted a small gathering at the mansion. No press, no strangers, just my closest team, the ones who stood by me when silence was more dangerous than speech. They raised their glasses and said they had never seen anyone so calm after a war. I smiled. True victory doesn't make a sound. It leaves silence behind. Glasses clinked. The red wine reflected in their eyes like blood turning into light. After the guests left, I walked down the long corridor. The golden lights painted my shadow across the walls. I opened the last window where the night wind carried the murmur of the city. Looking down, I saw my reflection in the glass, a woman in a black gown, hair loose, eyes still and deep as a lake after a storm. I whispered, almost soundless, "No one can hurt me twice once I've learned to look at the wound without closing my eyes." The city lights caught my pupils, making them gleam like streaks of metal. In that moment, I knew it was over. No more blood, no more tears, no more Ryan, no more the girl in the old robe. Only me, Emma Collins, standing in the world I rebuilt from ash. The wind cut against my skin, carrying the scent of salt and smoke, but I didn't turn away. I let it wash over me like a cleansing. Then I spoke softly, each word deliberate and sharp as metal against metal. Women were not born to avenge. We were born to remember and to turn memory into law. In the distance, thunder rolled. Lightning flashed across the glass, carving a white line through my shadow. It looked like an ending, or perhaps a beginning. That night, I didn't sleep. The clock on the wall ticked slowly each beat, counting down to a silence deeper than death. Outside the window, the New York sky was layered with low clouds, the city lights reflecting upward and painting the air in a metallic orange glow, beautiful and utterly alone. I wrapped myself in a robe and went downstairs to my study. The oak desk still held traces of ash from Ryan's burned letter, resting quietly like evidence from a case that had already closed. But I knew no case truly ever closes. Only the people inside it choose silence. On the desk lay the morning paper. The front page showed my picture, Emma Collins, the woman who wrote her own verdict. I stared at that line for a long while before folding the paper. I hadn't written a verdict. I had only read it in the calm voice of someone who had once been condemned without the right to defend herself. I opened my laptop and read the internal report from Collins Holdings. The new projects were growing. Profit stocks, investments, all stable, all precise, like a machine running on reason. I typed a few short directives, then paused. Beneath them, I wrote one private sentence for no one else to see. Always leave room for compassion, even when the world no longer deserves it. The first light of dawn filtered through the glass. I stood and poured a cup of coffee. The steam rose against my face, bringing back the mornings when I used to make it for Ryan. Everything had changed, but the smell remained the same, strong, dark, and honest. I took a sip, and the bitterness dissolved cleanly on my tongue. Perhaps that was the taste of freedom. At noon, Garrett brought in an envelope. The Global Financial Union wants to honor you with the title Reconstruction Leader of the Year, he said. Would you like to accept? I looked at the silver envelope, then asked, can an award buy back the self-respect of a woman who was betrayed? Garrett said nothing. I placed the envelope back on the desk. Then it's unnecessary. Later that afternoon, I visited the Museum of Modern Art, the place my mother once loved. The Monet Gallery was quiet, the pale blue light falling softly over the brushstrokes like waves. I stood before water lilies, and in that moment, I understood why my mother had once said, the strongest women never win with the sword, but by standing still in the storm. I closed my eyes. The noise of the city faded. All I could hear was the rhythm of my heartbeat, steady, deliberate, like the final movement of a symphony nearing its close. That evening, I invited Garrett to stay for dinner. He looked around the house and said softly, "It's so quiet." I replied, "Justice was never loud. It only echoes when people are finally quiet enough to hear it." He smiled. "What will you do next?" I sipped my wine and looked through the glass window at the moonlight reflecting off the river. "I'll start an education fund for women, those who've had their voices stolen. Not to help them seek revenge, but to teach them how to negotiate." Garrett nodded slowly. "You're redefining strength." I answered no. I'm just translating the language of pain. After dinner, I walked him to the door, then went alone to the balcony. The city below still glowed, but tonight it felt calmer than usual. I wondered if the world becomes more orderly when women reclaim their power, not because they win, but because they stop being afraid. I sat in the wooden chair, the night breeze brushing through my hair. From afar, the sound of a distant ship horn mingled with the wind, and my heart beat like the rhythm of an old song. I took my notebook and wrote a few lines. A woman's strength doesn't lie in making men kneel, but in her ability to stand tall without anyone's support. I closed the notebook. On the horizon, lightning flared, illuminating the entire city in a single white flash, Manhattan, the Hudson River, and my shadow cast against the wall like a mark. I wasn't afraid. I smiled, because now I understood light doesn't come from the sun. It comes from those who have been burned, yet still choose to stand amid the ashes and shine back into the darkness. And as the night closed in the profound stillness of someone who had paid every debt, I whispered to no one but myself, "No one can make me small again." The words echoed in my mind like the slow, deliberate strike of destiny's gavel. Not an ending, but the beginning of a quiet empire named Emma Collins. The next morning, the New York sky opened in a pale silver hue, unusually quiet. No car horns, no voices, only the sound of wind sliding along the glass towers. I stood by the window on the 50th floor, holding a cup of black tea, watching the sun rise over the river. The light filtered through the thick glass, spilling across my shoulders, cold, thin, a reminder that dawn is never gentle. It is merely the exchange of power between darkness and light. I had completed the full circle of consequence, love loss, awakening, and ascension. But this morning, I no longer thought about victory. I thought about order. A world where women need not seek revenge to earn respect. A world where justice does not demand blood but intellect. Garrett entered carrying a new folder. The board has approved the educational fund under your name, the Collins Initiative. It will provide scholarships for women who were fired, humiliated, or forgotten. I nodded. Good. Start where voices were once silenced. They don't need pity, they need a chance to speak. Garrett looked at me as if about to say something, but only smiled instead. "You know, Emma," he said softly, "sometimes justice wears the face of a woman who says nothing." After he left, I sat alone and opened my old notebook. The last page still carried my father's handwriting. "True strength is knowing when to stop." I added beneath it, "I've stopped, but not to rest, only to begin again with clarity." That afternoon, I attended the launch of the foundation. No grand stage, no bright spotlights, just a large white room bathed in natural light. The women seated in the front row, some were lawyers, some former employees who had lost their jobs for saying no, some single mothers. They didn't look at me with admiration, but with awareness. I preferred that gaze more than any applause. I took the microphone, my voice low and steady. "We cannot erase the darkness," I said, "but we can learn to see through it. Some call what I did revenge. I call it order. Because in every civilization, when women forget their worth, justice becomes a privilege of the powerful. And I refuse to live in that world. No one spoke. None needed to. There were a few tears, but no sobs. Only empathy, thick, silent, like the stillness before a storm sweeps through society. When the event ended, I stood by the door, shaking hands with each woman. A young girl gripped my hand tightly, her eyes wet but her voice firm. "Thank you," she said. "Because of you, I believe women don't need a man's power to be respected." I squeezed her hand gently. "Don't thank me," I said. "Thank yourself for standing up." That evening, I returned to the mansion. The hallway lights stretched across the marble floor like ribbons of gold. I walked slowly, each step echoing clearly in the quiet space. In the center hall, my mother's piano still stood. I opened the lid, touched the keys. The sound rose warm, full alive. For the first time in years, I played not to forget, but to remember. The notes filled the room, blending with the wind outside the garden. In my mind, I saw my parents, my father standing by the doorway, glass of whiskey in hand, my mother at the piano, smiling. They said nothing, but their eyes seemed to whisper, "You've found yourself again." When the melody ended, I rose and stepped onto the balcony. A fine rain was falling city lights, reflecting off each drop like molten metal. I breathed deeply, my breath merging with the chill of the air. I thought of Ryan not with anger, not with sorrow. He had become a faint shadow in memory, nothing more than proof of my greatest lesson. When a woman loves completely, she can be betrayed. But once she understands, no one can betray her again. I whispered my voice almost dissolving into the rain. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the highest form of power. In the sky, lightning flashed bright and white, reflecting my face in the glass. In that light, I saw the woman I had once lost, returned now, serene, needing no armor, no crown. I turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind me. The house glowed in soft gold silence. I poured another glass of wine and looked out one last time. The city was still moving, but this time it no longer devoured me. I raised the glass, smiling faintly, and spoke the final words of my journey. A woman's justice doesn't need gunfire. It only needs light strong enough to make others see. The rim of the glass touched the table, ringing a clear, short sound, like the closing note of a symphony. And in that moment, I knew my story was no longer about pain, but about memory, freedom, and the rebirth of a woman once erased. The final light slipped through the curtains, falling across my face, cold, beautiful, at peace. One chapter closed. A dynasty began. In a world where women are often forced to choose between love and self-respect, the story of Emma Collins reminds us that true strength does not lie in revenge, but in the ability to rise in silence and let justice speak for itself. When a woman understands her worth, she doesn't need to prove it through anger, but through intelligent serenity and the courage to no longer fear losing anything. If you believe that women's justice doesn't need to scream, but needs the light of awareness, then like and subscribe to help us share stories of pride, wisdom, and dignity. Before you go, leave a comment with 3 words that capture what you felt on this journey: feminine light.